Racist cops plant drugs in black woman's car. Unaware she's the DEA boss investigating them. The sun was dipping low behind the skyline of Atlanta, painting the streets gold and crimson. On the corner of Auburn Avenue, traffic lights flickered, lazily, while the rush-hour crowd hurried past. But in one lane, pulled over at the side of the road, a scene was unfolding that has played out in the United States far too many times. A routine traffic stop, two white officers and a black woman behind the wheel. Only this time, the woman in the car wasn't just anybody. She was Special Agent Danielle Parker, the newly appointed regional director of the DEA, one of the highest-ranking black women in federal law enforcement. And unbeknownst to the officers about to violate her rights, she had been investigating them and their precinct for months. The stop that changed everything. Danielle Parker was driving her government-issued SUV home from a long day of reviewing files. She wasn't in uniform. She liked to blend in, to feel like an ordinary citizen after work. Her dark hair was pulled back. Her glasses rested on the bridge of her nose, and her badge was tucked away in her purse. That's when she noticed the flashing blue lights in her rearview mirror. She sighed, pulled over, and waited. The first officer swaggered up to her window. "License and registration," he barked, without a greeting, without explanation. His partner stood a few feet behind, hand resting too comfortably on his holster. Danielle handed over her documents calmly. "Officer, may I ask why I'm being stopped?" "Broken tail light," the first one smirked, though Danielle knew every inch of her vehicle was maintained to government standards. She also knew this excuse, this tired, recycled justification, had been used on black drivers across America for decades. Her heart sank, not because she was afraid of guilt, but because she already knew what this was, a setup. The plant. After a few minutes of whispering behind her car, the officers returned. "Step out of the vehicle," one demanded. Danielle raised an eyebrow. "For a broken tail light, step out of the vehicle." She complied, knowing better than to escalate. She had investigated too many cases where black drivers didn't make it home. She stood on the curb, arms folded, as the officers began rifling through her car. Then, just as she expected, came the moment. The taller officer leaned down between the seats and pulled out a small plastic bag, holding it high in the air like a trophy. White powder glistened under the streetlight. "Well, well," he drawled. "What do we have here?" The other officer chuckled. "Looks like possession with intent to distribute." Danielle stared at them, unblinking. Inside, her blood boiled. They thought they had just caught a black woman with drugs. They thought this was another easy arrest to pad their stats, another body to throw into the system, another life destroyed. What they didn't know was that the bag they planted wasn't just a crime against an innocent woman, it was a nail in the coffin of their entire corrupt operation. The weight of history for Danielle. This wasn't just personal, it was ancestral. She thought of her grandfather, pulled over in Alabama in 1963, beaten by officers because he looked suspicious. She thought of her cousin, locked up for a minor possession charge while white classmates selling pills walked free. She thought of Breonna Taylor, of Sandra Bland, of George Floyd. Every name was a wound. Every story, a scar carved into the black experience in America. These officers weren't just two bad apples. They were a continuation of a system that had always viewed black skin as probable cause. A system that didn't just criminalize, but hunted. But today would be different. The reveal. The officer holding the drugs grinned. "Ma'am, you're under arrest. Turn around, hands behind your back." Danielle's calmness unnerved him. She didn't beg. She didn't cry. She simply said, "Before you embarrass yourselves further, you might want to take a closer look at who I am." She reached slowly into her purse, pulled out a leather badge case, and flipped it open. The gold DEA shield gleamed in the fading sunlight. Below it, in bold letters, Regional Director, Danielle Parker. The officers froze. Their smirks evaporated. One stuttered, "Well, wait, this isn't—" But it was, and Danielle wasn't done. "You're both under federal investigation," she said coldly. "And congratulations, you just made my job a whole lot easier." The investigation. What the officers didn't know was that for months, Danielle and her task force had been gathering evidence on their precinct. Reports of planted evidence, fabricated charges, excessive force, all disproportionately targeting Black and brown residents. Dozens of complaints had been buried, victims too scared to come forward. But Danielle wasn't scared. She was the storm they never saw coming. Within an hour, internal affairs and federal agents swarmed the scene. Body. Cameras were seized. The planted bag was collected and dusted for prints. And those prints? They belonged to the very officers who claimed to discover it. The hunters had just become the hunted. The courtroom months later, the courtroom was packed. Journalists scribbled notes. Cameras flashed. At the front sat the two disgraced officers, pale and sweating in their suits. Across from them, Danielle testified with unwavering poise. She described the stop, the lies, the false evidence. She recounted the years of community mistrust, the dozens of families torn apart by planted drugs and fabricated charges. She spoke not just as a law enforcement official, but as a Black woman who had lived the reality of being targeted, profiled, and dehumanized. Her voice cracked only once, when she said, "I could have been another name on a hashtag, another statistic, another story my community mourned." Silence filled the courtroom. Even the judge leaned forward, eyes heavy with the weight of her words. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, the room erupted in applause. Justice, rare and fragile, had been served. The deeper lesson. But Danielle knew the fight didn't end there. Removing two corrupt officers was a victory, yes, but the system that created them remained. Racism in policing wasn't a glitch. It was the code. She addressed the press outside the courthouse, her words cutting through microphones and cameras. "This case was never about me alone. It's about every Black driver pulled over for fitting a description. Every family. Broken because an officer decided to plant evidence. Every child who grows up fearing the very people sworn to protect them. Justice is not just convicting two men. Justice is dismantling the system that trained them to believe my Blackness was a crime." Her speech went viral. Across the nation, people replayed her words. Some wept. Some grew angry. Some, for the first time, began to truly understand why this story matters. This isn't just fiction. It's reality disguised as narrative. The names change. The cities change. But the pattern is the same. Black men and women across America have been stopped, searched, framed, beaten, and killed under the guise of law enforcement. Communities have lived under a cloud of fear, where a traffic stop could be a death sentence, and innocence meant nothing against the word of a badge. This story asks us to confront uncomfortable truths. How many innocent lives have been destroyed because evidence was planted? How many officers abuse their power, believing no one will ever hold them accountable? How many more Danielle Parkers exist, ordinary citizens who could be framed, but without the shield of authority to protect them? It forces us to ask, when will the system change? The final scene months. Later, Danielle drove past the same stretch of road where it all began. The tail lights of cars glowed in the night. A young Black boy stood on the sidewalk with his mother, watching police cars. "Drive by." He looked nervous, clutching her hand tighter. Danielle pulled over, rolled down her window, and smiled at him. "You don't have to be afraid forever," she said softly, almost to herself. Because for her, this wasn't just about revenge. It was about rewriting the narrative, about building a world where a black child could see a police car and not feel fear, but safety, where justice wasn't a rare miracle, but a daily guarantee. The boy waved back. The traffic light turned green, and Danielle drove on, knowing the fight wasn't over. But neither was her determination.